I don't. But yeah, it's been a great morning so far with Richard and Elaine talking about all things unusual. And yeah, just really just having a think myself and just generally regarding, pests, whether it's the usual or unusual ones that we come across. Yeah, it's always important to remember that, yeah, we deal with the things that need to be dealt with when they're causing problems that, are a risk to public health, the economy and crops and things like that. So, yeah, it's just a good reminder, isn't it, as well, is that if we do come across these unusual pests, is to assess whether or not we need to do anything with them. And if we don't, leave them be. But if we do, then, yeah, hopefully you've gained a little bit more knowledge on where to go for the information and how to address that. But yes, thank you for all joining with us. How many have we got? 147 participants with us. So joined us for the first bit of these presentations and continuing to stay with us for the second part. Talking about what time of the day it is. So Dr. Claudia Riegel is our next speaker. And I can see Claudia is there all the way in from, are you in New Orleans at the moment? Oh, you're just on mute at the moment. There we go.
Good morning. Yes, good morning. Thank you so much.
So is it? So we like to talk about the weather in the UK. So what's the weather like in New Orleans?
Absolutely the 100% opposite of the weather you're having. So it is hot, not too much rain actually, but it's just pretty extreme.
Yeah, we all get excited when we have a hot day, and today in the UK, well, certainly where I am in the north of the UK, it's sparkly and sunny, so we're all very happy at the minute. All very happy. But it's great to see you again, Claudia. It's been a few months, isn't it? Time has flown by.
All right, you should be able to see my screen, I'm hoping.
Yep, I can see that there. Yep, I can see your main. Yeah, there we go. Fabulous. That's perfect. So yes, I'll leave you to it and speak to us about yeah, these unusual pests. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much for the invitation, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about mosquitoes, and so the unusual pests and how to treat them. So I think it's really important to get back to the basics of mosquitoes and hopefully have some ideas on how to approach if you have some issues. So just real quick though, for the folks that have not been to New Orleans, this is what our city looks like. You can see on the map, there's a little star over where New Orleans is located in Louisiana. And so really it's a historic city, lots of activity all the time. Lots of tourists come here. Honestly, I've lived here for about 24 years, so it's home now. I'm originally from Chicago, but it's a great place to live. And working with the mosquitoes, there's quite a bit of history in our city. And so again, we have to compare ancient history, right, to just history of 100 and something years ago. But if we look back, it's not been that long since many thousands of people died of yellow fever, with really the last known recorded epidemic here in New Orleans was in 1905. So if you've been to New Orleans, hopefully you visited some of our cemeteries, but if you have not, please come. And there are cemeteries with mausoleums where families, have died of yellow fever. So there's a little map there. You can see in the 1800s, places where there was yellow fever and, malaria was also an issue. So it's important for us to always look back a little bit so that we can prevent some of these issues and making decisions about infrastructure that might cause us problems later. Just real quick about our organization, that's our facility. And well, at least one of them. We have 4 different facilities, 4 buildings, but we work with rodents, we work with mosquitoes, and we have quite a robust termite program because of the invasive species Coptotermes formisanus. So hopefully you'll come see us if you have not. So let's get back to a few of the basic things about mosquitoes, and then we'll get into integrated mosquito management and some of the approaches that I think you should be taking. So real quick, and I always say it's so important to know the biology of whatever pest you're working with, and also to identify how to identify those pests. And actually for mosquitoes in the UK, there's some real serious implications here, especially with identification. So with invasive species, to make sure we get to know a little bit of the basics. But anyway, let's go to it. They're in the order Diptera, and they have two wings, right? So these are true flies. There's others in that group, which is important, but basically they're flies that bite in some cases. So here we are. The life cycle, there's going to be the aquatic, right, portion, and there's going to be the terrestrial portion, and with the aquatic being the eggs, the larvae, the pupa. So I always talk about biology, but I want to really think about the control, portion as well. And so, of course, you need that water in the cycle. And so this is where our residents, your customers, even your pest management professionals really need to have that focus on the water. And you have to turn over containers, things like that, where you can, or at least where you can also manage that water. So the larvae will typically feed here on bacteria and other decaying organisms. And some species really like organic water, which we'll talk about it in a minute. Now, there's lots of different species of mosquitoes, but they lay eggs typically on the surface or near the surface. Sometimes they look like little tiny specks of dirt, and others will be in a raft. So you have Culex species in the UK, so they lay their eggs in a raft. But you can see this photograph, there's a glass, and this ring is actually, those are all eggs that have been adhered right above the surface of the water. Then they hatch, of course, they go through 4 developmental stages called instars. And again, depending on the temperature, it will take about 5 to 14 days. And again, depending on the species, right, it's going to be different sizes. But they can, most all of them can develop in pretty small amounts of water. So these are just some examples of what to look for. From the larvae, it goes to a pupae, and typically non-feeding here. And these are 1 to 4 days or so. They move around, okay? They dive. Actually, when you're doing an inspection and they sort of see that shadow, they'll dive down. So sometimes it's kind of hard to find. But that's the stage right before the adults are going to emerge. And the males and the females are going to look a little bit different. So you can see at the top here, the male with that sort of plumose antennae, and then the female at the bottom. So it's the females, right, that are only going to bite and take that blood. And that blood really is for that development. They need the protein for development of those eggs. So there's a mosquito here hatching from the pupa, emerging into the terrestrial state. All right, and as far as feeding and reproduction, females, mosquitoes can feed on animals, right, or on humans, and that's where we have some issues. There are some mosquito species that will feed only on amphibians, for example. So it really depends on that species. They can be attracted to body odors and carbon dioxide from your breath, body heat. There's a variety of attraction there, and it really varies often from person to person. Females can mate once and store sperm for life. And they need that blood, right, for production of those eggs. And depending on the species, you can have 4 to 5 batches of eggs in a lifetime. So when we are doing here in New Orleans, we do mosquito control for the entire parish of New Orleans, so the whole city. And a lot of times we're targeting those old, which is usually 30-ish days, right, females that potentially could have picked up a virus or are sitting there resting. So they could have a little bit of a long life cycle. Now, when it comes to mosquitoes globally, right, there's a lot of species, maybe 3,500. And of course, this changes all the time as new species are being described, or taxonomically things are merged. In the US, we're looking at about 176 species, and about 10% of those are important vectors, right? The ones that we need to worry about that may be transmitting something like West Nile virus or different encephalitic diseases. I was doing some homework in the UK, and it looks, what I found was about 34 species, and I'm sure that's changed a little bit depending on the source you're looking. But what we are doing here is looking at, of course, your temperature and how warm it is, and a lot of times bites can happen all year round. I grew up in Chicago, and clearly it is really cold, and so mosquitoes are not a big issue there. in those cold months. But where I live, it never really gets that cold. We get a little bit of frost in the winter here and there. But we really do have mosquitoes year round, but there is a lot of seasonality still in some of the species. We're going to talk a little bit here how to protect ourselves. You can protect your customers, for example, and, really talking about it at the local and the community level. It's very, very important to have good awareness, for identifying invasive species that might be coming in, but also what the community can be doing for helping. And so I always say this, pest management is a partnership. It's a partnership between the folks like us that are doing the work, but it's also your customer, the residents. Everyone needs to work together so we can be effective. A little bit of basics here too is that classification of mosquitoes happens by breeding habitat. And so we're going to be talking first from the floodwater mosquitoes and the permanent water mosquitoes. But containers is probably what you're going to be running into most of the time, especially in those backyards, in those places that are around those homes. But you will have floodwater mosquitoes and permanent water mosquitoes that can fly. So it's important, again, for you to know what is around the properties that you are servicing. So I did a little bit of homework here, and I'm telling you, this is a fantastic guide. I actually downloaded. I'm going to go print it off and keep it in the office in our library. Really wonderful resource through the Wetland Life Group. So there's a big project there, and they're looking at what is going on, not only with mosquitoes, but other organisms in freshwater and brackish water wetlands. Really interesting. So I put lots of references on my slides. Snap a photo, and you can go look it up later. But again, I would really encourage everybody to look at that. And what they did was they went through and identified lots of different species. They documented where they were. And so these are some of the examples that you have here that are the floodwater and also some of the permanent water mosquitoes that are out there. These are not ones that we typically see here, but the genera, the genus is. So it's usually the species that are going to alter just a little bit. But you can see that some of these prefer permanent pools of water with, slightly brackish water, for example, sewage, underground water bodies. So it's really important to know the species, understand the biology, because that's going to help you target their breeding sites, potentially where they're living. How do you alter the environment, or potentially if you're doing a treatment as well? So with a pesticide, a adulticide, or a larvicide. So very important to know. These are just a couple of examples with Anopheles claviger. Cochleartidia richardii is another one here, so that are commonly found in your region. And again, the paper is down there below where it provides some information about these particular mosquitoes. Also, you have lots of wetlands. So just for all of you to know, in June and July of 2023, I spent 23 days in the UK on vacation. Had an absolutely beautiful time, rented a car and went all over. Actually, in this particular trip was England and Wales. And so I snapped lots of photos because I think anywhere we go, we can't help, right, but look at our deal with our pests that we work with at work, right? It's part of our fabric. But this is just a great example here of those permanent wetlands. You have plenty of them all over. And don't forget, on the coastal regions with those floodwater, and you can have brackish water, as I said, but you can also have areas that have inland, woodsy area, green, grassy spaces that become flooded. So those are areas where would be your wetland areas. But as I mentioned, this is probably the mosquitoes in containers are probably the ones that you're going to deal with more often if you're servicing those homes. There's 80, the genera would be Aedes, and Culex also are found in these containers. The species will vary, of course, and I'll show you an example here in a minute. But think about those tires, the containers, like anything, right? Bird baths. All those things can contribute. These are just some examples. And, don't forget about the trees themselves. You have beautiful trees in the UK that hold water. That's a natural pool. And the picture right below that tree hole is from a hotel, right? And so just little things where water is just accumulating and it provides that habitat for those mosquitoes. A lot of people like to collect water in rain barrels, and that's great, right? There's a lot of green infrastructure projects here in the U.S., primarily here in New Orleans. But holding that water is great. You're saving water, recycling that water, all that. But it's very important to keep those rain barrels clean and functioning properly. We actually find that a lot of times, as I had just shown you, if it's not screened, you might have mosquitoes inside the water in the barrel, but sometimes it's even on top of the lid. So really important here to educate your customers to please do these things correctly so they're not creating their own problems. So very, very important. All right, so here's one of the species that you would find, excuse me, one of those container breeders. And so that's one of the 80 species there. And so these are, pretty urban, right? So they look similar to some of the 80 species that are there. So we're going to talk a little bit in a minute about albopictus, Aedes albopictus, Asian tiger mosquito. So you need to be on the lookout for that particular one. There's lots of implication. But then also what we need to worry about is going on vacation, becoming infected with something, and then coming back and potentially infecting some of the local mosquitoes that you have there. I couldn't find any information on how competent this particular mosquito is for transmitting some of these viruses, but again, it's still very similar. So I would assume that it likely can. So know how to ID your mosquito. They do bite humans here, from what I read in the literature. Some mosquitoes are pretty opportunistic, right? So this is a great example, Culicida annulata. So not only can it go in containers, but in ditches and ponds and cisterns. And so it really is very opportunistic of what habitat it's using. And so they can be inside and outside. A lot of times we have our windows open, or they may not have screens, especially some of those older historic buildings. We see that here as well. And they can also overwinter in all the stages, right? So very important. These are more common in the springtime and the late autumn. So often big numbers. And a lot of these larger mosquitoes are the ones that we get calls on, especially these floodwater mosquitoes that also occur or are more prevalent in the springtime and the fall. We get a lot more phone calls about those than we do some of the medically important mosquitoes during this time, so which is sort of in the peak of summer. So the next one we need to, wanted to mention here is the Culex pipiens. This is a complex of mosquitoes. Northern house mosquito, the northern part of the U.S. also has this particular mosquito. Pretty opportunistic as well. It does prefer really more organic water, kind of nastier, smellier water. That's its choice to lay the egg rafts. It does prefer birds, but it will feed on mammals. And typically it's more active at night. So if you look at its cousin here in the southern part of the United States, and that's the one, this is a mosquito that we worry about quite often, is the southern house mosquito. So you can see it's laying, a female there's laying its eggs. It comes out white, but over the course of a short period, it turns dark to protect those eggs from the sunlight. But you could see the habitat on the northern part of the U.S. here. And also they're pretty abundant, mostly through summer, pretty low populations, I would say, in the winter time. They bite more readily at night, just like the Culex pipiens, but these are really good vectors for the encephalitic diseases. So West Nile virus and Eastern equine encephalitis. And there's a bunch of different encephalitic diseases that it can transmit. So again, many of you may be traveling, and this is really the reason why I'm telling you this, so that you don't bring home anything. All right, so mosquitoes as vectors, right? So fortunately, you don't have really locally transmitted cases are not really a big issue. However, you do have a lot of imported cases as people travel all over the world, if it's malaria or if it's dengue, even Zika. So we can basically get infected and come back. So I think it's really important. So what's a vector here? It's an organism that can transmit diseases. And it could be a bacteria, a virus, or a parasite, right, from one animal to the other. And you can see there's all kinds of vectors out there, and especially with insects, mosquitoes are a very important one. And here's just an example here from the WHO. There's lots of different examples: West Nile virus, malaria, yellow fever, dengue, chikungunya, Zika, right? And there's also different kinds of nematodes. If it's dog heartworm, and there's other human diseases as well, they're a big issue. So look, we're on an airplane all the time, right? So my family is from Brazil. I went to Brazil this summer to visit relatives, and they were having a lot of dengue. And so my uncle and other relatives, and so always paying attention to the mosquitoes that were around and wearing repellent. But the thing is, what I want to make sure, and this is what we educate our public here in New Orleans, is you might go on vacation somewhere, you're feeling great, you get bit by a mosquito, you're great during your vacation, but when you're back on that airplane, you're not feeling so great, or maybe you get home and you're not feeling so great. And so that's very important to stay aware and let your physicians know that look, I was traveling and I'm not feeling great. I'm having these symptoms, fever, chills. I need you to test for some of these mosquito-borne diseases. And so again, know how to identify these species. And so there's an example here of Aedes albopictus, the black and white mosquito with that stripe, down the thorax. Very, very distinct and actually beautiful mosquito. Its little cousin there, Aedes aegypti, which does not appear to be a big issue where you are. But again, we need to look at importation, things like that. And so it's a little bit different, but it's got a little bit of a different pattern on its thorax. And of course, Culex quincunxatus, pretty common in a lot of parts of the world. And we want to make sure that you're not bringing them in. So let's focus a little bit, because this is, as I was reading different things from the UK, there's a big effort here on prevention, right, of entry of Aedes albopictus. It's already through France, through Normandy, other parts of Europe. It's an issue already. Other parts of Europe have had France, I think, and I think it was Italy, have had local cases of chikungunya some years ago. So it can happen in those temperate areas. So range expansion, from what I read, is absolutely expected. And they breed in containers. They like tires, but again, those small containers that I showed you, those are all very suitable. They can transmit a variety of diseases. These are typically more active during the day. They like to hang out in that lush vegetation, which you have the most beautiful gardens, right? I think when we were there, I think I visited every day, was visiting a garden because it was so beautiful. But they're also crepuscular, so they're active at dawn and dusk. Very important. All right, so the main thing with introduction is that their eggs are pretty drought resistant. They can be transported long distances on things. It showed you the eggs, right, that attach on, but also in plants and importation. So this is a cemetery here in New Orleans, but the yellow fever mosquitoes throughout South America, southern part of US, Asia, all over. And so again, very, very important. These are a little bit more tolerant to desiccation. They like a little bit hotter weather, but very important. All right, so let's get into the good stuff here, which is going to be that integrated mosquito management. And so I really want you to think about, there's some real clear strategies of what needs to be done with integrated mosquito management, from surveillance or survey, for example, source reduction, the use of biological control. You can use insecticides. Resistance testing is one of those pillars in integrated mosquito management. And then, of course, public education, very critical, but I won't lie, very difficult, right? So it's changing that behavior of our clients, our customers, our residents, to do a few little things. So talk a little bit about surveillance. And actually, there's a really wonderful website here from the UK government as well. And it tells you a lot about what they're doing on a nationwide surveillance. And it really focuses in on actually Aedes albopictus, which is pretty important, but it does tell you what they're doing. So there's the website. I really would encourage you to visit it so you can stay on top of what is happening in your own country. So look, I think most of you may have a business or you're servicing a particular property. So you may not be doing area-wide surveillance like we do, But that surveillance is very, very important to be doing. And so it helps us establish the reason why we need to do control. And it also tells us, is what we're doing working? And so again, not everybody has a ton of money, right, to do all the surveillance, but you can actually tailor it to your own resources. And so if you've got an area where you're servicing an area, or you're just trying to figure out what mosquitoes you have, you can buy some traps, just pretty readily available, and then you can figure it out. And so you're really basing your treatments and things on decisions. There's lots of sampling equipment here. This is all really inexpensive. A lot of it you can just go buy, and you'll have an idea of what you actually are dealing with. When you're not sure what you're doing, you can actually do these things called a landing rate. So it sounds silly, but there you can see there's a container there with dry ice. And that inspector is just looking to see what lands on him, in a minute. So those are very important, easy. Just obviously have to be careful if there's disease cycling, which is important in the population. But there's lots of traps here that you can use. I wish there was a trap that would catch everything, but it does not. If you're dealing with floodwater mosquitoes, you may be using something different than if you're trapping your Culex pipiens, which is a gravitrap, the one at the bottom in the middle. And of course, your 80s, that's kind of the standard, which is the BG Sentinel traps. But I think if you're going to buy a trap, potentially just a general CDC light trap might do the job, but they're out there. And so what happens is we, have set locations, we bring these mosquitoes to the lab, and we actually do virus testing because West Nile virus is a big issue around here. And so that's what we're using to drive the decisions of if we're going to be doing some kind of treatment or not. You can also do some surveillance here with pupa, right, and larvae, and just a turkey baster, for example, a little tube there with the ball. You can go ahead and just squeeze and pull some water in, or a dipper. Those are all different locations. And of course, you can always document where some of your breeding sites are. And it's sometimes a little bit more challenging, and it's important, again, for you to look around your customer's property to see what might be an issue, so that if there is a tire pile or broken pipe or something like that, you can report it to the officials so that hopefully they can get to it and fix it. Now, when it comes to part of that IPM thing, very, very important in community prevention. So look, it is all about turning over containers. And so really focusing in on your customers, and then hopefully you are all providing as well, where you're checking and turning these water holding vessels over, so that you're not going to have the big issue to begin with. It'll save you, of course, on treatments that you would have to do if it's larvicides or adulticides. So it really needs to be an integrated system. Don't forget those drains, or gutters, I should say. Very important. Bird baths, right? So those eggs of 80s will attach onto the side of those bird baths. So you really need to scrub it out, bleach it out here and there. Of course, rinse it out really well because of the birds. But that is something to really consider and teach your customers. So you're not having that habitat to begin with. Many companies offer add-ons, right? Very, very important. And so you can do those things. Some folks use biological control. We do as well. And again, all I would say is make sure you check with your local regulations of what fish you can use and in what location. But they're actually quite effective when you're using it. When it comes to adulticides and larvicides, there are not a huge number of different kinds of products we can use. And of course, larvicide is where we want to go first. If you're going to use those products, those adulticides are going to kill those that are flying around, right? And then in some cases, very common, are using barrier treatments. And we really want to advocate the use of repellents that are actually effective. When it comes to doing mosquito control, you really need to have an arsenal of products with you. Have different types of larvicides that you can potentially use. There's some really I would say, pretty low impact products, especially some of these bacterial larvicides on the environment. So they work quite well. And of course, there's lots of different ways to put them out. And so might have an airboat like we do. We do have an aircraft, things like that. But, there's lots of different formulations of this. The use of adulticiding, so you want to kill those mosquitoes that are adult. There's lots of different options out there, from sprays to what's more common in the industry for pest management is going to be your residual sprays. Indoor spraying, we're not going to see that too much. Those are primarily overseas, for example, in Africa, different places where South America, where the mosquitoes might be harboring inside of that home. Now, you have to see what's registered. Obviously, in the UK, might vary a little bit. But you have to make a lot of decisions about when you're going to be using these products. And so, again, habitat manipulation is really the way to go. But if you do have to use these products, make sure that you're really reading the label. You're being really judicious about when you use it, so that we're not creating a lot of issues. Lots of different ways of applying, from ULV handheld products to portable mist blowers. Those are going to be larger droplet sizes. Make sure you're wearing the right PPE, of course. And those barrier treatments, you have to pay a lot of attention to what that label says. All right. And sometimes it is not the right thing to do. So make sure that you are really reading that label and, using your full arsenal of products, not only adulticiding. You cannot apply to water. Many of these are pyrethroids fish are very sensitive to pyrethroids. Fruit trees, vegetable gardens, flowers, all those are places that are absolutely no-goes. And so really important here just to consider the non-target effects. And I'm telling you, you have a lot of beautiful gardens with a lot of bees. And so here is one example, but it's very important, right, to make sure that you're following that label. And if you're killing bees and other non-targets, not a good thing for our industry, but we want to think about a good stewardship, and we want to be very professional about what we're doing. Here's just an example here in Lincoln, but beautiful gardens here. And so again, we have to really think about those non-targets. And so of course, this is not an area that we would be doing those treatments. So I'm just going to show you one slide here on resistance management. This is one of the pillars, but again, it's that repeated use over and over and over. And over time, a lot of those mosquitoes will become resistant. And I am telling you this from our own experience here. Many of our Culex cuica fasciatus, the southern house mosquito, is just that we cannot kill them anymore with pyrethroids. And so we don't even actually use a lot of pyrethroids. So these are coming probably from the over-the-counter market, but it's really important to use strategy. So wrapping it up here with public education, and I found this on one of your websites from the local government. Great, actually, document. It really still focuses in on all those things that we talked about, right? And I want you to really focus in on your customer expectations. Customers often think like, I want to see 0 mosquitoes. That is just not going to happen. And so again, we need to make sure that their expectation is this is, we're partners in the group. They do need to wear repellent as well. And we also tell them to take 10 minutes a day and walk around their yard and move things out. And the way you're going to educate people is going to be very different these days, right? And how you're going to target them. So I'm sure you do this as well. And again, make sure you're protecting yourself, your workers, if they're in an area, long sleeves, repellent, boots, all of that. I do want you to really think about when you are traveling abroad and potentially bringing back a virus. So just pay attention, take a good repellent with you. And there's lots of information. Look, the Caribbean and South America is having a raging dengue epidemic right now. And so very important for all of you to know. And to wrap it up here, look, mosquito control is pretty complicated. And hopefully there's some folks there doing some surveillance that you can tap into, but you need to really think about having a variety of adulticides and larvicides if you can. Train personnel, know your biology, super important, do your education, and use those products according to the label. So with that, I'm going to wrap up here. So if you are interested in coming to New Orleans, we have a great meeting coming up next year. It's the New Orleans Urban Pest Management Symposium. There's a little QR code. You can scan it and get on the list. I'm about to launch the agenda. We do this every 3 years. It is a very integrated meeting. And so we do lots of different topics. The other thing is going to be very rodent heavy for the folks that love rodents. And so anyway, you can reach me there, my contact information. And again, thank you so much for the invitation today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claudia. That was yeah, amazing. And your level of detail is just just fantastic, and done lots of research on the UK side of things. So that's
Yeah.
great as well. Did it, I don't know, was it quite easy for you to find, or?
Yeah, I'm telling you, it was so exciting. So like I always start, right? So I speak all over the world actually, and this is one of the most exciting things that I think about what we do is learning more about different parts of the world. And so yeah, I started to do just a regular scan through Google, right? And then I went into Google Scholar, you start typing in certain
Mhm,
things, and all of a sudden like amazing papers came up. So I really
mhm,
recommend, we're not necessarily affiliated with the university. I mean, there's Tulane University and all this kind of stuff. But for just the folks at home, Google Scholar is a great opportunity, or is a great site because it's free. So it may not have all the papers, all your scientific papers, but it has a lot. And so
yeah.
those are, look always at the primary source. It's really great, but yeah, amazing, great stuff.
It does, yeah. I think I discovered that Google Scholar about a year ago, maybe someone mentioned. And even though some of the documents or white papers are, you have to maybe purchase them in other areas, a lot of it is also free, isn't it?
A
And
lot of
yeah, and
free.
amazing.
And look,
Yeah.
I mean, always look at your local universities, make contact, right?
Mm,
So we're a public agency, but I work with pest management. We work with universities, state and federal and local, the associations. So if there's a paper that you need that you can't get, it forces you to buy it, go reach out to a university
mhm,
professor. Or
yeah.
if there's a student at a university and say, hey, go grab that from your library so I can take a look at it. So there's a lot of different ways of getting those primary sources, but
Mhm,
yeah, I mean, there's just amazing, great information. But I'm telling you, if you run into an Aedes albopictus, make sure your government officials know and really focus in, right? Let them know that is there. There's a lot of implications for the UK. And unfortunately, with
mhm,
climate change, things are getting warmer. That habitat's going to be there. So very
yeah.
important to stay aware and know how to ID your mosquitoes.
It's getting warmer and wetter because I think it's the
Yeah,
extreme ends of the weather, isn't it? A lot more
it
rain, creating a lot
is.
more breeding
So
areas as
much.
well as,
You,
yeah.
you know, for us, we are having such a hot summer, and last year as well, is that even like our southern house mosquito, it does not like this really heavy heat. So for
Mm,
us, we're actually seeing our numbers go down a little bit, right? Instead of
mm,
our sort of normal year. But anyway, well,
yeah.
thanks so much. I appreciate it,
Yeah,
buddy.
thank you, thank you. Do you know what? I have lots of questions for you, but we're that's very selfish of me, and we are running over it a little bit. I can see a
Yes,
couple of questions have just come in.
sure.
Have you used Zoom before, and the questions, because you can type the answer in there as well. Would you be
Oh, sure.
okay
So what I'm
doing
going
that?
to do is I'm going to stay on and I'm going to start going through the questions for you. Is that all right?
Oh,
To save some time
amazing.
for
That
you.
that would be fantastic. I know it's, what is it, about 5:45 in the morning now? About
I'm already
5:45
awake, ready to
a.m.
go. It's all good. Super happy to be here.
Early start of the day. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Claudia. It's been a real pleasure
Thank
seeing you
you.
again. And I'll get my next holiday booked for New Orleans next year and come and see
Very
you.
good.
All right. Take care. Thank you. Fabulous. Yeah, that was I think a lot of us, I don't know, I don't get a lot of calls about mosquitoes from members all of the time. A few here and there, but I think, yeah, I think we do actually maybe get those questions from customers more than we appreciate. So some great advice there from Claudia. Tip those water sources up, and get rid of what you can and what you can't. We've got some BTI. That's the one common one we use in the UK. I'm not going to try and pronounce what that's about. I'm not going to try and pronounce it because I always fail miserably. And hey, it's not about embarrassing Natalie today. So, but anyway, fantastic.